I would be amazed if everyone listening to this particular broadcast does not have a story about getting a parking ticket of some kind in the previous last year, or maybe the last 2 years, from one of these private companies like the Britannia Parking Group, Euro Car Parks, who have released their profits. They've risen by 70% year on year. They've gone up from 2.5 million to 4.2 million. The Britannia Parking Group had a turnover of 14.8 million last year. Pre-tax profits have leapt threefold. APCOA, the UK's largest private parking firm, made almost £1 million in profit after 2 years of losses. How you lose money running a parking company, I'll never know. But it is quite extraordinary how much money is changing hands. And what I want to know is, where is this money going to? Particularly when you talk about local councils handing out nearly £200,000 an hour in fines, with the worst junction in London generating almost £11 million. So it's not just parking, it's also bus lane fines, fines for going through red lights, fines for sitting in yellow boxes. An awful lot of these fines actually handed out just because you've been caught on camera. Let's talk to Nicholas Lyse, Head of Road Policy at the RAC, and find out what they make of it all. Nicholas, very good afternoon to you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Now, as I said, I think everybody has been the victim of these parking piranhas, I think I would like to call them at the moment, because they are charging an awful lot of money to an awful lot of people all the time. And so I'm going to start by asking you, when was the last time you got a parking ticket?
It's been a few years since I've got a parking ticket, actually,
Really?
Mike. I'm generally quite nervous when I park my car anywhere now, and I'm one of these sort of people that sort of looks around for any sort of sign that I can find to tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing, which has allowed me over the last 4 years or so not to get a parking fine. But I know it's really difficult for people out there, because the standards of signage in many of these car parks is so bad.
Well, exactly, and you've been very fortunate, probably in that case, not to have been to a hospital, not to have been to a shopping centre where you may have ended up overstaying because of some reason or other that was beyond your control, or indeed a railway station that you left your car there longer than you thought because the train was cancelled or your train was late, because that happens to a lot of people as well. And these parking companies don't care. You know, by and large, they will not accept your appeal unless you've got very, very, very solid material and very solid grounds for saying it wasn't you. You know, they will basically just make you pay the full amount.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's two reasons, really, that the profits have really increased at many of these private parking organisations. Firstly, private parking operators are currently operating on more land, which has given them more ability to dish out what they call parking charge notices, which are different from penalty charge notices, and therefore, as they're operating on more land, they're issuing more fines. There's also an increased use of AMPR equipment, which effectively is replacing the sort of tickets and the barriers. So in many cases, you'll go in there into one of these car parks, and you have to very, very carefully look about what the terms and conditions are. And it seems that a lot of drivers fall foul of that.
Well, that's true. I mean, I've got a lot of people tweeting me this morning because I asked them to do so. One here from Bobby, who says, I'm in the process of ignoring a ticket from Parking Eye, but my niece, who I also advised to ignore a ticket she got, has just received this after ignoring a court summons. And it's a judgment, basically, for the claimant in default. And it says that she now has to pay £160,000 forthwith, because I think part of the problem is people are under the impression that they can avoid paying these because they're not technically enforced by the local council, so they're not actually a criminal problem, but they are a civil problem. But these parking companies can take you to court and can, at the very least, make you pay, and at the very worst, really damage your credit rating.
Yeah, we wouldn't advise people to ignore them. Effectively, part of the problem is with private parking is that the sector itself is largely self-regulated as it stands. So if you're a private parking operator, in order to gain access to the DVLA database, you have to be members of an accredited trade association. Now, there are two large accredited trade associations in this country, which many of these parking operators are members of. Now, the problem is, Mike, that these associations operate different codes of practice with different appeal systems. So the whole system is incredibly confusing for drivers. And, From a driver's point of view, when you go into a car park, you just want to park your car, know that it's going to be safe there, and pay what you have to pay for as long as you need. You're not aware of this sort of system that seems to operate where there's two different associations with different appeal systems, and it's just extremely confusing, and that's why we need a sort of a national code of practice, so to speak.
Well, we do. And also, is it right, for example, I know this is perhaps beyond your pay grade, Nicholas, but, I'm going to ask you anyway, is it right that hospitals, for example, should be outsourcing their parking to companies like this? Because, for example, I know from doing these stories in the past that they will be in receipt of a fee, perhaps, from Parking Eye to get the contract to actually run the parking in the hospitals. But when they run it in such a sort of, cack-handed and quite mean way, where they're punishing people who are going to see sick relatives who don't know how long they're going to be there for and who sometimes put money into a machine, but in fact they're not able to have an unlimited amount of time because that's not the way the system works, and they end up getting a fine, which they can't really afford to pay and don't want the distress of.
Yeah, I think that with hospital parking, it's incredibly emotive, and part of the issue is that I believe that the decision is taken by the trusts as to whether or not to outsource the parking operations to a private company. Again, that's something that I would have to check over, but that's what I understand is the situation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to hospital parking, when you drive your vehicle to a hospital car park, you park your car and you go in there for as long as you are needed to go in there, and it should be very clear when you walk in there how much the tariffs are, if there should be tariffs at all. And then when you leave, you pay on exit. We shouldn't have this situation in this country whereby you go to a machine, the machine doesn't work, it doesn't accept cards, so therefore you have to scrabble around for coins, and then an hour or two later, because you know that you think to yourself, well, actually, I might need to go back downstairs and put more money in the machine, and then you go downstairs and you do that, and again, if you miss the so-called timeline within which you've paid for, then you get a fine. I don't think that's fair. I think actually what should happen is that all hospitals should be pay on exit. So you go in there, you leave your car there, you know what the tariffs are, and then you pay when you exit. That's how it should operate.
And there should be a maximum as well, so that you're not, if you are for some reason having to leave your car there for a period of time or even a period of days, that you don't get hit by an hourly charge. There should be some form of recognition of the fact that people who are parking in hospital car parks are not there because they're trying to get away with something,
Yeah, absolutely. It should be capped, and that's something that we have called for. We've asked the government to look into this as part of their wider review into the private parking sector. We understand that for hospitals they need to have some income from parking. There is an argument that these should be abolished altogether, which we're sort of sympathetic to, but we're also sympathetic to the fact that there needs to be some sort of income there and there needs to be some sort of parking control. But it has to be very clear. I mean, the bottom line is, Mike, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is that when you drive your vehicle into a hospital car park, you don't go in there with the intention of, trying to pull a fast one over the parking operator. You're going in there because either you need to go and see a doctor or a nurse or somebody, or you're visiting a relative that is obviously very sick, and that's the last thing you want to be worrying about.
Sure. And what about what people should do? Because if there is one of these notices that comes to your home and you don't ignore it because you don't think that's a good idea, how's the best way to deal with it? Because quite often you can appeal it, can't you?
You can appeal it, and what I would suggest that people do is, if they feel that they've got a parking charge notice which they have been wronged over, the first thing that they should do is go and have a look at the car park in question and see whether or not all the signage has been put up in the correct manner. So effectively make sure that the car park is operating in the correct manner. Take a note of the terms and conditions and also the operator. Then the first step really is to go to the operator. So it might be APCOA or Eurocar Parks or whoever that might be operating that. Try and go through their appeal system. If they reject that, then there is another option to go through, which is something called Poplar, which is operating on British Parking Association type car parks, and there's another one called the Independent Appeals Service, which is for the other trade association as well. So it is complex and it is complicated. The RAC actually does provide advice for this on our website, which I encourage everybody to have a look at. So if you do feel like you have received a ticket and you've been wronged by a private parking operator, then go and have a look at that and follow that process. It's worth bearing in mind as well that according to the accounts that Popular put out, around 41% of all appeals actually result in a cancelled charge.
Yeah.
So a lot of these tickets are being issued, perhaps unfairly. So you've got a pretty good shout.
OK. Nicholas, thank you very much indeed. Nicholas Lyse there from the RAC, Head of Roads Policy, talking about what you can do. I've always said that you should always appeal constantly any parking fine that you get, because there's a pretty good chance that you can actually get off it, particularly if you've got a reasonably good excuse. It won't wash if you just say, oh, you know, I was visiting my sick mother and therefore that was why I was 2 minutes over or 5 minutes over. But the thing is, and I'll tell you some of the tricks of the trade that you can do. We've got lots of calls to take, so we're going to get to those very shortly as well. But imagine councils raking in £200,000 an hour in fines, right? £1.6 billion collected last year. Now, these are the same people who say they've had all their funding taken away. Well, what are they doing with the £1.6 billion, for heaven's sake?